Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a single number that basically holds the entire insurance industry together. Now, you'd think this number would be a simple, hard fact, right? Well, as we're about to see its real value, it completely depends on who's asking the question.
So to really get our heads around this, let's try a little thought experiment. Just imagine making that promise to your friend. You know there are going to be costs, for sure, but you have no idea when they'll hit or just how much they'll be. This right here, this is the fundamental, almost impossible question that every single insurance company has to answer every day.
And their answer is to create something called a reserve. It's basically a giant pot of money. It's an estimate of how much they think they'll need to cover all those future claims they've promised to pay. You could say it's the company's best guess at the cost of its promises.
But this is where it gets really interesting. You'd think there would be one single, true amount, wouldn't you? But in reality, that number is not fixed at all. It actually changes, sometimes dramatically, depending on its purpose and who it's for. The person calculating it, the actuary, has to wear a lot of different hats.
All right, let's dive in by putting on our very first hat. So imagine you're an actuary, and your job is to calculate the reserve number that's going to be published in the company's big annual report, the one everyone sees. For this task, you are the public guardian. So when you're wearing this hat, your goal is all about building trust. You've got to show investors, your policyholders, and just the general public that this company is rock solid, that it's stable, and that it's going to be around for the long haul to pay its claims.
And how do you do that? Well, it comes down to a few key principles. The key words here are prudence, stability, and consistency. What this really means is the actuary is going to choose assumptions that are deliberately cautious, maybe even a little pessimistic. It's all about making sure there are no nasty surprises later on. It's showing financial strength by being conservative. Okay, let's switch gears and put on our next hat. Now the audience isn't the public anymore. It's a powerful government regulator, and their entire job is to make sure the company doesn't fail. This is the regulator's checkup.
The purpose here shifts completely. This isn't about public perception anymore. This is about a strict, legally required stress test. You have to prove, under really specific rules like Europe's Solvency II regime, that your company is financially strong enough to survive even the worst-case scenarios and protect the people who bought your policies.
Now, to do this, the regulator doesn't want a prudent number. Nope, they want what's called a best estimate. This is the actuary's most realistic, totally unbiased guess of what the final cost will be. Think of it as the statistical average of all the possible outcomes. It's not optimistic, it's not pessimistic. It's just the cold, hard mathematical expectation.
And under a set of rules like Solvency II, this isn't just a single number. It's actually a specific formula. You start with that best estimate, then you add something called a risk margin, which is basically a buffer for all the things that could go wrong. And then you make an adjustment for the investment income you expect to make before you have to pay the claims. And that brings us to our third and final hat, the one that puts the actuary in probably the most dramatic scenario of all. The company is being sold.
All of a sudden, that reserve number is not just some accounting entry on a spreadsheet. It becomes a massive factor in the company's price tag. See, a higher reserve means higher liabilities, and that means a lower company value. So right away, you've got a natural, high-stakes conflict.
And this is where that conflict becomes crystal clear. The buyer, obviously, wants to pay as little as possible. So their actuary is going to argue for a high, very prudent reserve to make those future liabilities look huge. But the seller, they want the highest price they can get. So their actuary will argue for a lower, more optimistic reserve. We're talking about the exact same portfolio of claims, but two completely different numbers, with millions of dollars on the line.
So how on earth is this possible, right? How can one actuary, looking at the very same data, come up with such different results just by wearing different hats? Well, the answer is hidden in their assumptions.
It really all comes down to their toolkit, and specifically a couple of dials they can turn up or down. The two most powerful of these dials are their assumptions about future inflation, which of course affects how much claims will cost, and this really important concept called discounting. Let's just focus on that second dial for a minute, discounting, because its impact is absolutely massive, and it perfectly shows how one simple choice can completely change the financial picture of a company.
So to put it simply, discounting just recognizes a basic financial truth. $1 you need to pay someone in 30 years is cheaper than $1 you need to pay them today. And why is that?
Well, because you can take that dollar, you can invest it for 30 years, and you can earn income on it before you ever have to pay out the actual claim.
And here's why that is so important. If you ignore all that potential investment income, if you don't discount, you are, in effect, overstating your liabilities. And this has a huge, huge impact on what are called long-tail businesses, like liability insurance, where claims can sometimes take decades to finally get settled and paid out.
Okay, so let's put some real numbers to this. For example, let's say your undiscounted best estimate of future claims is $100 million. That's the raw total of every payment you think you're going to make over the next, say, 30 years.
But after you apply a discount rate to account for all that investment income you'll earn, the present value of that exact same liability might only be $85 million on the books today. That is a $15 million difference created entirely by turning one single dial.
So as we've seen pretty clearly, this whole idea of a single true reserve, well, it's basically a myth. The reality is just so much more nuanced, and it really depends on the context.
It all comes back to the hat the actuary is wearing. For the public, they're a guardian, and they use a prudent, cautious number. For the regulator, they're a risk manager, using a realistic best estimate plus a safety margin. And in a deal, well, they're a negotiator, where the final number is just a product of competing financial interests.
You see, in the end, a reserve isn't a fact you can just look up in a spreadsheet. It's a really sophisticated, context-dependent estimate that's built on a foundation of data, expertise, and, most importantly, on a set of assumptions that are chosen to tell a specific story to a specific audience.
And all of this leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought. If a number this important, right at the very heart of the financial world, is so subjective and so dependent on context, what other financial facts in our world are not really facts at all, but just stories that depend entirely on who's doing the asking?